I think we might assume that Brahms first thought about writing his German Requiem, as he called it, after the death of Robert Schumann in 1856. Schumann had been in a mental asylum and Brahms moved nearer Clara Schumann to look after her and her family. And I think when Schumann died, Brahms had the idea to write a commemorative piece. And perhaps it's interesting that although he was thinking of a requiem, he wasn't going to set the Latin text. He wanted to set the Lutheran text from his own Bible and select works that were of comfort to the living rather than prayers for the dead. And so I think the idea came from then, and we know that he began to map out how the movements would work and how the text would work. And we also know that some of the music he was writing, some of the music which became his second piano concerto and also was abandoned from his first symphony because he struggled so much about the writing of his first symphony. We know that some of that music found its way into the second movement of this Requiem. And so the idea had sprung up, and by 1865 there were 6 movements completed. And in 1865 Brahms's mother died. And I think again we can infer that it was at that point that he decided to add one more movement, and that movement is the soprano solo, which is our number 5 in our vocal score. And that was written as a direct result of the death of his mother. So by 1866 the piece was complete, and then there were performances of various movements. First of all, 3 of the movements were performed, numbers 1, 2 and 3, and it's in that performance that the timpani player misunderstood the dynamic of the final fugue of number 3 and played his repeated Ds so loud that nobody could hear the chorus. And in fact there were rather boos and disapproval at the end of that performance. But people had recognised that the work was potentially a great one. And then a little bit later, 6 of the movements were performed, and at that point again everybody recognised this was a great piece. In fact, it's Brahms's longest piece. By 1868 the work was complete, and in that year it was given a complete performance and then took its place in the standard repertory. It travelled all over Germany and in fact all over Europe and even to America, and is of course one of the most popular works by Brahms, and of course one of the most popular works in the choral repertory. I don't think we think of Brahms really as a composer of choral music on this large scale, and it's wonderful we have this big isolated piece by him, this masterpiece. There are some smaller choral orchestral pieces, 6 of them, and I'm including in that the Alto Rhapsody, which has a male voice chorus. And there is one other cantata, Ronaldo, which is scored for male voice chorus and orchestra, quite a large work and completed just after the Requiem, but because of the scoring it rarely gets performed. But there is a big choral tradition going on in Germany at this time, and Brahms is busy writing for the smaller choir, motets and anthems and part songs, and so there's quite a bit of choral output there. And also we must remember he wrote a lot of songs. I'm always surprised that his songs are less well known than those of Schumann and Wolf, but there are lots of songs, so he is very much a choral composer. But of course he felt that he was in the shadow of Beethoven. He was a romantic composer writing in that Beethoven classical idiom. And so we know Brahms very much for his symphonies and his concertos and the sonatas and the quartets, all the chamber music. And that's how we associate Brahms with the workings of his musical life. He was also a fantastic pianist. Funnily enough, a lot of people find Brahms quite difficult to listen to because they don't like the thickness of the textures, and that's partly, I think, because he had wonderfully big hands and could write chords of 3 or 4 notes and manage to play them, and his orchestration tends sometimes to be rather thick. As for the music itself in this German Requiem, and by the way, at one point Brahms thought he might call it a human requiem. Of course, the text is in German, is in his own language, and is taken from the Lutheran Bible. And the music, very cleverly, is in a mirror image in the sense that we say blessed at the beginning, blessed are those that mourn, and then at the end, blessed is the last word, selig, that we hear. And so there is an arch form going on in the piece, which was actually helped by adding movement number 5. The central movement is that rather short, how lovely are thy dwellings, which itself has taken shape as an anthem and is used very much in churches as well as in the concert hall. The music begins very subdued, and I think Brahms is very clever that not all of the music is slow, but certainly the first movement begins slowly, and there are no violins in that first movement, so the whole mood of the first movement is very subdued. And the music of the first movement ends, he brings in a harp, and it's not often that Brahms writes for a harp, but the harp plays at the very end of the first movement, and the whole Requiem at the seventh movement, that same music comes back. And so when we get to the end of the Requiem, we make that connection with the first movement. The second movement is the one that had some material from those sketches that he was busy writing when he was afraid to complete his first symphony. And that begins with a movement which we always describe as a march, but is in 3/4 time, where flesh is as the grass. And that then turns into a choral piece of great vigour. The next movement introduces the baritone soloist, and the baritone sings in 2 of the movements. He never has an aria as such, but he interjects with the chorus, and that's the movement that ends with the big fugue, which is based on a D pedal note, and hopefully in our performance the timpanist doesn't wipe out the chorus. Then we have How Lovely Thy Dwellings, followed by the soprano solo movement, which is one about comfort. The chorus sing different words to the soprano, but they sing that we're comforting as a mother comforts. I do feel that this Requiem was written for Schumann as a comfort for Clara, and perhaps a comfort for Brahms himself. In the 6th movement we introduce the baritone again, and then we have some dramatic text which is all about the last trumpet, which of course in German is the last trombone, Posaune, calling us, death, where is thy sting? Hell, as we say here, where is thy victory? Some very dramatic music there, followed again by quite a long fugue, ending in glorious C major. And then the last movement takes up the mood of the first, and as I say, ends with the harp in F major, which is the key of the whole piece. In fact, the key structure is very cleverly worked out. And so the piece ends with consolation in that rather consoling key of F major.